It was just another calm morning at my lake cabin office, the kind of quiet that makes you forget the outside world even exists. I had just settled in, organizing some case files for a big state zoning meeting, when the front door flew open without warning. At first, I thought it was just a delivery. But then in stormed Karen, the HOA president from down the road, flanked by two men in cheap, knockoff uniforms. She was barking orders, waving a clipboard like it was a badge, and yelling that I was violating community policy by running a business from the property. I didn't recognize the so-called officers, and their badges looked like they'd been printed off a discount website. Karen marched straight into my workspace like she owned the place, snapping pictures and threatening to shut it all down. One of the fake cops even tried to unplug my laptop, claiming it was evidence. Something felt off, and I trusted my gut. I quietly hit record on my phone and made one quick call. 3 minutes. That's how long it took for real law enforcement to pull up. Sirens cut through the still air as two marked cruisers rolled in fast. Karen's smug look faltered, but the tension only got worse from there. What happened next was something none of us expected, especially Karen, and trust me, this wasn't the first time she'd crossed a line. But it just might be the last. Karen had always been a problem in the neighborhood. From the day I bought the lake cabin, she made it her mission to remind me who ran things around here. Whether it was petty complaints about my Harley being too loud, or writing citations about imaginary HOA violations, she was relentless. But today felt different, desperate. The fake cops she brought with her didn't speak like real officers. They fumbled over legal terms, gave vague threats, and avoided eye contact when I started asking questions. One of them even called Karen ma'am like she was their superior. That's when it clicked. They weren't cops at all. This was her latest scheme to intimidate me, but she took it way too far this time. I live here. I pay my taxes. And my cabin office. It's fully registered with the state. Karen's problem wasn't about zoning, it was about control. She didn't like that I wasn't afraid of her, and she hated that I kept winning. Last month, I pushed back on her. Attempt to reclassify part of the lakeshore as HOA-controlled land. That didn't sit well with her, but calling in fake law enforcement? That crossed a serious line. The moment the real officers stepped out of their vehicles, you could feel the tension in the air shift. Karen's mouth moved, but nothing coherent came out. One of the real deputies asked her to step aside, and that's when she started unraveling. Fast, and it only got worse from there. The deputy took one look at the badges those fake cops were wearing and immediately knew something was off. I watched as he signaled his partners subtly, and within seconds, they were separating everyone. Karen tried to argue, said something about a private enforcement agency she'd hired. But the real officers weren't buying it. The guy in the knockoff uniform started sweating bullets, while that mess unfolded outside. I stepped back into the cabin office, trying to make sense of how far Karen had pushed this. This wasn't just about property lines or HOA disputes anymore. This was impersonating law enforcement. That's a felony. And she did it in broad daylight, fully confident no one would stop her. But what really got me thinking was how she even convinced those guys to show up. Was she paying them? Threatening them? Or were they in on something bigger? I remembered how last week, one of my trail cams near the woods caught someone snooping around late at night. I had assumed it was just a curious hiker or a neighbor's kid. But now I wasn't so sure. I pulled the footage and froze it on the screen. One of the fake cops had the same distinct limp as the figure from the video. That meant Karen had been planning this for at least a week. And if that's true, then whatever she's after isn't just about nuisance complaints. There's something deeper going on, and I needed to find out what before it spiraled even further. As the sheriff's deputies separated Karen and her fake officers, I stepped back inside the cabin to review more of the footage. My gut told me there was more to this than just a power-hungry HOA president playing dress-up. Scrolling through the surveillance clips, I spotted something that made my stomach drop. A black SUV with tinted windows had been parked across the lake every night for the past 5 days. Always around the same time Karen's lights would go off at her house. I zoomed in, and though the plate wasn't fully visible, part of it matched the one on a vehicle I'd seen earlier in town. The same vehicle used by a known local real estate scout. It suddenly clicked. Karen wasn't just trying to push me out for HOA control. She was trying to make the property look like a legal liability, so she could force a sale under the table. That's when I heard the clatter outside. More shouting. I rushed out to see one of the fake cops trying to bolt toward the road while real deputies chased him down. Karen was standing near the gate, arms crossed, not saying a word now. She had that cold, defeated look, but I knew better. That woman always had a backup plan. I glanced at my phone, 2 missed calls from the county assessor's office. And that's when it hit me. What if this whole thing was already in motion on paper? What if she'd already filed something, without me knowing? I called the county assessor right away, heart pounding. The woman on the line sounded hesitant, almost like she'd been expecting my call. After a few moments of awkward silence, she confirmed my worst fear. A transfer request had been filed for my cabin property just 2 days ago. Not by me, not even by someone pretending to be me, but by a limited liability company tied to the HOA board. And it was already under review. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Karen had taken it even further than I imagined. She wasn't just playing games with phony cops or trespassing in my office anymore. She was trying to steal my land outright. While I was busy working with the state attorney, briefing on a separate property dispute, she had quietly set up a false paper trail that could potentially remove me from my own cabin legally. And just when I thought that was as bad as it could get, the assessor added something else. There had been a private inspection requested that morning. Someone had actually been inside my cabin office while I was outside dealing with Karen and her fake cop crew. I hadn't noticed anyone go in, but it must have happened while I was distracted. I ran back inside and checked my drawer, and sure enough, a set of blueprints and land surveys were gone. The exact documents that proved ownership and legal use of the lakefront. This wasn't just HOA harassment anymore. This was theft. I didn't waste a second. I called the state attorney's office and explained everything. Luckily, I had already shared most of the land documents during our previous briefing, so they were familiar with my case. Within the hour, a state investigator and 2 uniformed officers met me at the cabin. We walked through everything: the break-in, the false transfer, even the bizarre visit from Karen and her so-called officers. The moment they saw the forged transfer paperwork, their expressions changed. This wasn't just a civil dispute anymore, it was criminal fraud. As they dug deeper, they uncovered something none of us expected. Karen's husband, who worked with the HOA board, had submitted the forged documents using a stolen notary stamp from a retired board member. The cops went straight to the HOA office. Meanwhile, I stayed back with the investigator, going over the cabin security footage. That's when the twist hit. On one of the interior cameras, time-stamped just 15 minutes before I discovered the missing documents, we spotted someone slipping into the office window wearing a maintenance uniform. Zooming in, it wasn't Karen, it was her son. The same smug kid who once demanded to take a ride on my Harley. The final blow came when police returned. Not only had they arrested Karen's husband and seized HOA files, but they'd also discovered a second set of fake property deeds with several other residents' cabins listed. My case wasn't the only one. This was bigger than I ever thought. As the truth unraveled, the entire neighborhood started paying attention. It turned out that Karen's family wasn't just targeting me, They had a long-running scam where they tried to manipulate ownership records and quietly take over cabins near the lake. Once authorities had the fake deeds in hand and verified the forgeries, it was game over for their little scheme. Karen's husband was charged with fraud, forgery, and conspiracy, and her son was slapped with breaking and entering. Karen herself was hit with trespassing and obstruction charges. The HOA board quickly distanced themselves from the mess, and a full audit was launched. Several board members either resigned or were removed. The real cops, not the fake ones Karen tried to scare me with, assured me that my cabin was now safe and that any future HOA business would be under strict legal oversight. I had the gate reinforced, added new cameras, and installed a motion alarm just to be sure. My wife and I spent the next weekend out on the dock, finally able to enjoy the peace we'd built here. We even hosted a few neighbors who had been dealing with their own quiet frustrations. Turns out, none of us were alone. So, if you're ever dealing with an HOA Karen who thinks she's above the law, stand your ground. Document everything. Protect what's yours. Because sometimes the ones yelling the loudest have the most to hide in with the right support. Truth always wins.